Okay, everybody. Today we'll talk about the nervous system in general. Okay, so our topic is the nervous system. First, we'll talk about the functions of the nervous system, then divisions of the nervous system, how we classify the nervous system. Then we'll talk about the cells in the nervous system. What kind of cells are present in the nervous system or in the neural tissue. Then we'll talk about those cells. There are two types of cells in nervous tissue or nervous system. One type of cells are called the neuroglia or neuroglial cells. Another type of cells are called the neurons. Neurons are the main cells and glial cells are the supporting cells. We'll talk about both. We'll talk about the neuroglia or neuroglial cells as well as the neurons. Then we'll talk about tracts, nuclei, gray matter, white matter. I remember I talked about gray matter and white matter in last class. We'll quickly repeat, and then we'll talk about the reflex. Okay. First, the functions of the nervous system. Your nervous system consists of brain, spinal cord, and many nerves. Okay? So these are the structures belong to the nervous system. And nervous system performs thousands of functions, many functions, but we can group or divide all those functions into three main types or groups: sensory input, integration, and motor output. Okay? So we can divide all those functions into three types or groups. Now let me give you an example. What is sensory input? If I touch your skin, that touch signal from the skin goes where? To the brain. And brain will process that, right? Is it touch or not? What kind of touch is that, right? Is it a kiss or, touch by finger? Is it hot or cold, right? All those information is processed where? In the brain, okay? So, the example, the signal going from the skin to the brain is sensory input. That means sensory input goes towards the brain. Is it clear? Another example. When you see something from your eye, signal goes to the brain, right? So that is also sensory input. When you put your food on your tongue, put the food on the tongue, taste signal goes to the brain, right? So that is also sensory input. Is it clear? All those are sensory inputs. Then brain does what? Brain interprets. That I told you. What kind of touch is that, right? Is it harmful or not? Should I move my hand away or not, right? All those things. If you feel that it is too hot, your brain thinks it is too hot, brain will do what? Will send a signal to the muscle of the hand to move the hand away, right? So that is called motor output. From the brain, the command is going to the muscle to perform the action. Make sense?
So what would make the muscle perform the action if something didn't actually touch you? Like say you were about to get hit by someone in the face and you knew it and you ducked.
Very good. That is visual. You are seeing, right? That visual signal is going to the brain. So input is in this case visual input, right?
Okay.
But response is going to the muscle.
Okay.
You are moving out. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So Input, that's a very nice question, that input and output, input goes from one structure, output goes to another structure. Make sense? Like in this case, input is going from the, you said, eye to the brain, right? And output from brain to the muscle. When you touch, the input goes from the skin to the brain and output goes from the brain to the muscle. Okay? Not to the skin. Okay? Is it clear? So, those are three types of functions. This is another example. You see, when you are thirsty, you look for water. If you see a glass of water, that sensory input goes from where to where? You see the water from the eye to the brain, right? You see the glass of water. And then, now you tell me, in this case, the brain will do what? Interpret, right? Brain will do what? First thing you will think, is it water or not? If it is close to chemistry lab, you will be more careful, right? Your brain will be more careful. It could be acid. You don't want to drink acid, right? So your brain will decide that, right? Is it water or not? Is it clean or not, right? Should I drink or not? Then brain does what? Decides the shape of that glass, because brain has to send signal to the muscle of the hand, right? The shape, you will grab the glass, right? You will grasp the glass. So your brain has to measure that, the shape of the glass, right? As well as the distance, because you will move your hand there, grasp it. Is it clear? So you see that quickly brain does so many things, right? That is the interpretation in the control signal. Here. So sensory input from the eye to the brain. Your brain is analyzing all those things and then sends motor command to the muscles of the hand to move the hand. Okay? So that is motor output. Now, classification of the nervous system. These are the parts of the nervous system, and your brain and the spinal cord belongs to the central nervous system, or CNS. And the nerves belong to the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. So, only the brain and the spinal cord belong to the central nervous system, or CNS. And you have many nerves throughout the body. Those belong to what? PNS, right? Peripheral nervous system. Now, nervous system, peripheral nervous system could be sensory and what? Motor. The nerves could be sensory or motor. Now you tell me, when you see something, signal goes from the eye to the brain, right? The nerve that takes the signal from the eye to the brain, that is what? Sensory or motor? Sensory. I have explained that already, right? Sensory. Touch, that signal going from your skin to the brain, that is also sensory. Okay? So those nerves carry the signal towards the brain are what? Sensory. Is it clear? And then your brain interprets that signal, right? Sensory input, and sends motor command. So those nerves take the signal from the brain to the effector organ that will perform the action, right? That is what? Motor. Make sense? So we have some nerves taking signal towards the brain. Those are sensory nerves. Some nerves taking the signal out from the brain. Those are what? Motor. Is it clear? So, two types. Sensory nerves are also called afferent. And motor nerves are also called efferent. Okay? Remember, arriving and exiting. getting out. So afferent, efferent. Okay. Now, motor could be two types. Voluntary motor and involuntary motor. The motor could be voluntary motor, involuntary motor. Involuntary is also called autonomic. You know, auto means self, autonomic. Okay. Now you tell me, if you see a glass of water, that motor signal from the brain goes to the muscle, right? And you move the hand to grasp it. So is that voluntary or involuntary?
Voluntary.
Very good. That is voluntary. Because if you think, no, I will not move my hand, you can do that. If you decide you will grab it, you will move your hand, right? So you see that motor is what? Voluntary motor. Make sense? Good. Now, have you seen sometime when you go to your doctor does what? Knee jerk test, right? So hits here with a small hammer and your muscle contracts, right? Is that voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary. You don't do that, right? It happens suddenly without your control, okay? So that movement is involuntary, right? That motor signal is involuntary. Is it clear? So two types. Another example. When you see delicious food, what happens in the mouth? Salivation, right? Is that voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary. So brain, first sensory goes from the eye to the brain, right? It is a delicious food. Then brain sends signal to the salivary gland. Make sense? To cause secretion. So that is involuntary, right? We don't do that. It happens by itself. So involuntary signal usually goes to the muscles and glands. Okay, I gave you both example. Okay, muscles and glands. Okay, now let's you see sensory afferent, motor efferent, voluntary, involuntary motor. So just go over. Now the involuntary or autonomic could be two types. Involuntary or autonomic could be two types. One is called sympathetic autonomic, another is parasympathetic. Okay, so sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of autonomic nervous system. Let me give you simple example. Just know that when you are excited, okay, sympathetic activation occurs. When you are excited, okay, and when you are relaxed, parasympathetic takes over. Okay, so sympathetic activity causes excitation, and parasympathetic activation causes relaxation. Is it clear? All right. Now you tell me, if you see a tiger is approaching towards you, right? Open. Which one will be activated? Sympathetic. Does it make sense? Fight or flight, say. So, sympathetic. Now you tell me, when sympathetic activation occurs, what are the changes occurring in the body? Tell me about heart.
Goes up.
Up, right? Heart rate will be faster, right? very scared or excited. So heartbeat will increase, right? Your blood pressure will go up, right? And
Breathing rate.
yeah, everything. Your alertness, right? Consciousness will increase. Make sense? So that is sympathetic activation. When you are relaxed, after the exam, you don't have any more exam, okay? So you are relaxed, right? And lie down, drinking coffee, so your body is relaxed, right? So that is parasympathetic at that time. Parasympathetic activation will occur, and what will happen? Heart rate will go down, blood pressure will go down, right? So muscle tone will go down. So those are the results of parasympathetic activation, right? Okay. Here, you see the blue lines and arrows are showing the direction, and blue lines are showing the sensory. So sensory always go towards the brain, and motor gets out from the brain, comes down this way and leaves the spinal cord. Okay, and sensory goes towards the brain. Okay. Okay. Now we'll talk about the neural tissue. I mentioned that two types of cells are present in the neural tissue. Neurons are the main cells, and neuroglia or neuroglial cells are the supporting cells. Okay, so we'll talk about both. Just know, if I ask you, what is the function of a neuron? Very simple answer. Generation and transmission of electrical signal production and transmission. Is it clear? Okay. Neuroglial cells are supporting cells, and there are many different types of neuroglial cells in your nervous tissue. Important ones, we'll talk about some important neuroglial cells. Before that, just know the important functions of neuroglial cells. Some neuroglial cells can move towards the site of injury. Not all. Some neuroglial cells can move towards the site of injury. If any injury occurs somewhere in the neural tissue, some neuroglial cells, they can go there. They will go there to do what? To engulf the microorganisms, if there is any microorganism there, right? Or any dead cell should be cleaned up, right? So they will go there to do what? Phagocytosis. You know phagocytosis, right? Okay, so they will engulf the microorganism or dead cells. Okay. Some neuroglial cells, this is one. Some neuroglial cells can guide the migration of young neurons. Now, when your brain is formed, only small number of neurons. Then they multiply by mitosis, you all know, to form the brain. So, small number of neurons. Now, neuroglial cells can guide them to different directions. Like we'll tell this neuron, you go there and then multiply to form this part of the brain. And we'll tell another neuron, you go that way and multiply there to form another part of the brain. Okay? So, that happens more during the growth of the brain, formation of the brain. Small number of cells, right? Then they need to go to different directions to form different parts of the nervous system. So, that is another function, guiding the migration of young neurons. Control the chemical environment. Some neuroglial cells can produce neurotransmitters or neurochemicals, and if depletion occurs, the concentration of that neurotransmitter or neurochemical goes down, those neuroglial cells will release the chemicals. Insulation, another very important function of some neuroglial cells. You know that your nerve transmits what kind of signal I said? Electrical, right? Electrical signal transmission, right? So you know when you see the electrical wires in your house, always they are what? Insulated, right? Insulated. So since nerves or neurons transmit electrical signal, right? So nerve fibers should be what? Insulated. Make sense? So that insulation is done by some neuroglial cells. Okay. So now I said there are many different types of neuroglial cells. These are some important neuroglial cells in your neural tissue. Astrocytes, microglia, Daemul cells, oligodendrocytes, satellite cells, and Schwann cells. So these are some important neuroglial cells. You need to remember these names, okay? And I'll mention only one or two functions of each, and you have to remember, not too many. I'll just go over one by one and mention one or two things about each type, and you have to remember. Astrocytes. Astrocytes look like star. That's why they are called astrocytes. Look like what? Stars. That's why they are called astrocytes. Cyte means cell. Astro is star. Now, the function of astrocyte is it helps to form the blood-brain barrier, BBB. Helps to form blood-brain barrier. Its name is telling you. What is it? It is a barrier between what?
The blood and the brain.
Blood and the brain. Very clear? So, now let's see. This is your brain tissue. Okay, brain tissue. And this is the capillary. This is the capillary in the brain. Okay? Now, astrocytes do what? You see, these are the astrocytes in the neural tissue. They have processes, and those processes go like this. Have foot plate. This is another astrocyte. Sends process to the capillary and covers the outer surface of the capillary. Like this. So now you see this capillary got another extra layer around it. Make sense? Got another what? Extra layer around it. So the toxic chemicals will not be able to easily get out from the blood and will not be able to harm the neural tissue. Make sense? In other parts of your body, you don't have that extra layer. You have only capillary wall. Make sense? But brain tissue has that extra layer, extra protection, right? And that is the blood-brain barrier, and which is very important because your brain, I mentioned in last class, is the most sensitive organ of the body, right? So brain tissue is very sensitive. So if any toxic chemical, enters into brain tissue, will damage the brain tissue. Okay? So that's why that protection is given, that layer is given by the astrocyte. You see here, that is the capillary, right? So around the capillary, that layer is formed by the astrocytes. Microglial cells. Microglial cells do phagocytosis, engulf the microorganisms or dead cells or debris. That's why they have many processes, easy to engulf. So defensive function. Defensive function. Ependymal cells, another type of neuroglial cells, they are found in the wall of the ventricles. In last class I talked about the ventricles. Ventricles are fluid filled cavities inside the brain. For example, this is your brain and this is a ventricle inside the brain. Cerebrospinal fluid is inside it, you already know. So this is ventricle. Okay. And in the wall of the ventricle, you have the ependymal cells like this. So this is another type of neuroglial cells. And the ependymal cells have cilia, soft hair-like structures like this. And this cilia move like this. So cilia, soft hair-like structures, hit like this. Okay, to move the fluid inside the ventricle. To move what?
The fluid.
Fluid, right? So cilia will move like this and move the fluid. If the fluid stays there without any motion, that fluid will get bad. Okay, so that movement of fluid is important. The fluid should move and get out. New fluid should be secreted. Okay, so that is very important. Now insulation. Few neuroglial cells insulate the nerve fibers. Example, oligodendrocytes, one type of neuroglial cells. This is oligodendrocyte. Looks like a full moon. Okay, this is the nucleus. So this is the cell body. Now you see, from the cell body, extensions come out and wrap the nerve fibers multiple times. You see, these are the nerve fibers, the yellow ones, and they are wrapped by those processes. So, is it not beautiful? Like, you know, it's the nerve fiber forming insulation around it. So, oligodendrocytes, but this is important, I may ask you. Oligodendrocytes, that sheet is called myelin sheath. Okay, myelin sheath. And remember that oligodendrocytes form insulation around the nerve fibers in the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, that means brain and the spinal cord. And two other types of neuroglial cells, satellite cells and Schwann cells. These are also neuroglial cells and they form insulation in the peripheral nervous system. Remember that. I will ask. So, satellite and Schwann cells form insulation in the peripheral neurons or nervous system. Now you see here, these are satellite cells. This is a neuron, the yellow one. So this is the cell body of neuron, you know, the axon. And around the cell body, you have the satellite cells that form insulation. And around the axon fiber, you have Schwann cells. These are Schwann cells. Form insulation. But in this case, this is interesting that Schwann cells form insulation, but in between the Schwann cells, there are open spots. Those spots are not insulated. Okay, so those are called nodes of Ranviers. We'll talk about that just now. Okay, so those are three types of neuroglial cells from insulation. Again, I'm repeating, oligodendrocytes around the nerve fibers in the central nervous system, and satellite cells and Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. Now, the main cells are what? Neurons. Remember that? Main cells are the neurons, and supporting cells are the neuroglial cells. So we'll talk about the main cells, the neurons. in your brain, how many neurons you have?
Billions.
Yeah, billions. And I said more than 100 billion, 100 billion. Okay? That means just think that neurons how tiny, right? You have billion, 100 billion neurons. Now, neurons are different than other cells of the body. How the neurons are different than other cells of the body? Neurons are long-lived. Neurons are long-lived. But there is a condition. What is the condition? The condition is they need continuous supply of oxygen and nutrients, glucose. Continuous supply of what? Oxygen and glucose. If you can give that continuously, they will stay alive for 100 years or more. Is it clear? But if you stop that, neurons will die immediately. So highly sensitive but long-lived. Is it clear? See, if I stop my blood circulation to my hand like this, stopping the blood circulation to my hand, okay? After 1 minute, if I remove it, you are fine. Now if I stop your blood circulation to your brain by pressing here strongly, what will happen?
You'll pass out or die.
Right. You will be unconscious or die, right? So, you see, that tells you that continuous blood flow is needed, right? To the brain. To do what? To give oxygen, right? And glucose. Your brain needs. If you can ensure that, your brain tissue, neural cells will stay alive longest. Okay? 100 years or more. Neurons, most of the neurons are amitotic. Remember, if you see the letter A, if you see the letter A, means absence. Amitotic. That means what? Absence of mitosis. Mitosis is what? Mitosis is what?
Split of the cell.
Cell division, right? Yeah. So mitotic means no mitosis occurs. That's why, you know, when someone gets stroke, usually doesn't recover, right? Once the brain tissue dies, normally doesn't recover. There are some neurons in the brain, they can do mitosis, but most of them don't. Is it clear? Okay, so electrical signal, I have mentioned that nerve signal transmission or neurons transmit electrical signal. So those are the properties of a neuron. Now if you see the structure of a neuron, if you see the structure of a neuron has a cell body, long process that is called the axon. This is the cell body, and from the other side of the axon you have short branching processes. I'll move you. These are called dendrites. Okay, so you have a cell body and two types of processes. What are those two processes?
Dendrites
And
and an axon.
axon is single, dendrites are
Multiple.
multiple. Okay, axon is long, dendrites are
Short.
short, and dendrites have branches. Okay, so dendrites, and this is axon, and this is the cell body. Inside the cell body you have the nucleus, and remember, in the cytoplasm you have micelles granules. One type of granules, highly concentrated chemicals are granules. Granules are highly concentrated chemicals. Okay, so those are present in the cell body. Now, I have already mentioned in the peripheral nervous system, the axon is covered by or insulated by what? Schwann cells. You must remember, right? Schwann cells. So these are the Schwann cells. And Schwann cells form the sheath that is called myelin sheath. By Schwann cells. By Schwann cells. Okay, so these are the Schwann cells and they form myelin sheath for insulation. Now you also remember I said that there are open spots between the Schwann cells. These spots are called nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. Okay, the spots between the Schwann cells. And this part, the end of the axon, is called axon terminal. We have talked about that when we talked about the neuromuscular junction. This is the axon terminal. Okay, and at the end of the axon terminal, you have button-like structures. Those are called terminal buttons. Terminal buttons. Okay, so that is the structure of a typical neuron. Make sense? Now, what is the function of a neuron? I mentioned in one sentence. Anybody?
What?
Function of a neuron
Production.
and transmission of what kind of signal?
Electric.
Electrical signal. So, remember, electrical signal always travels this way. Dendrites bring the signal into the cell body processes it and then sends out through the axon. So the signal will eventually come here. Okay? So dendrites bring the signal in and axon takes the signal out. And then you have another neuron here. This is another neuron, next neuron. This is the axon, and these are the dendrites. And this is the synapse. You see, the axon terminal of previous neuron talks to the dendrite of next neuron. So this is called what? Synapse. Neuron to neuron synapse, from one neuron to next, where they talk to each other. So axon terminal of previous neuron and the dendrite of following or next neuron. Same thing again here. This is the axon terminal. Here is the next neuron. Dendrites receive the signal, take the signal into the cell body, and cell body sends the signal out. Okay? So another synapse. So we have hundreds of billions of synapses in the brain. Each neuron can make 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. So now you can think how many neurons you have? 100 billion, right? And each neuron then makes how many synapses? 1,000 to 10,000 synapses. So now you multiply. So now you know how many synapses are present in the brain. Make sense? And that's why brain is so powerful. That's why brain is so powerful. It can, communicate many different ways. Okay, so this is exactly the same thing that I did wrong here. So you just go over. White matter, gray matter. I mentioned in last class and showed you. So if you see your note, you will find it. What is white matter? What is gray matter? Let me quickly tell you. If you see the outer part of the brain, where you have the cell bodies of neurons, all these are cell bodies, and in the inner part you have the axons. So these are the axons. And the axons, have myelin sheath. Now white colored myelin sheath. So all these axons are covered by myelin sheath. So that's why this part looks what? White. Make sense? And in this part, you have all cell bodies and dendrites. So inside the cell body, you have nasal granules. And this part looks gray. Looks gray. That's why it is called gray matter. Okay? So white matter has the insulated myelin sheath axons. Okay? And here you have the cell bodies and dendrites. That's why they look different color. Color is different. And without microscope you can see. If you cut the brain, you'll see outer part is gray, inner part is white. So that's what white matter and gray matter. Now, neurons could be three different types: multipolar, bipolar, unipolar. This is simple. Some neurons have only one axon, no dendrite. So what happens, you see, the axon is attached to the cell body this way. So this is actually a single axon. And cell body is attached to the side of the axon somewhere. But this is only one axon. Someone may think this is dendrite, this is axon, but no, this is only one axon and cell body is attached to the side. So this type of neuron is called unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. Uni means one. Unipolar or pseudo-unipolar. That means only one axon, only one process. That's why uni. Now, there are some neurons. This is the cell body, has only one dendrite. This is only one dendrite and one axon. So 1, 1, 2. That's why this is called bipolar. Bipolar. So bipolar neurons have only one dendrite and axon is of course one. Okay, so 2. And most of the neurons are multipolar. That's why I did draw this one. This is the most abundant type neuron. Multipolar. That means what? One axon and multiple dendrites. That's why this is called multipolar neuron. Okay? And most of the neurons, typical neuron is multipolar. You see here, these are multipolar neurons. See many dendrites, one axon, many dendrites, one axon. This is bipolar, one dendrite, one axon. One dendrite, one axon. These are the branches, so only one dendrite, okay? And this is unipolar, only one axon. This is not a dendrite, remember, it's only one axon and cell body is attached to the side, okay? Synapse. I have already shown you the synapse, right? Here, axon terminal of previous neuron and the dendrite of next neuron, right? So this is what? Synapse. What type of synapse is that? Neuron to neuron. Make sense? One neuron to another neuron. Neuron to neuron. So this is neuron to neuron synapse. In last one of previous lecture, you remember I talked about neuromuscular junction. At that time, muscle contraction. I showed you that the axon terminal These are axon terminals. I showed you the muscle fibers, right? Presynaptic, postsynaptic, okay? So this is a synapse too. Neuromuscular junction is a synapse. Neuromuscular junction is a synapse between the neuron and the muscle fiber. That's why this is called neuromuscular junction. Make sense? So synapse could be two types. Neuron to neuron, one type that I showed you here, and neuron to muscle. Okay? Neuron to muscle. That is neuromuscular junction. Reflex. You remember I said that when you go to your doctor, knee reflex, right? Or knee jerk testing. So this is a reflex. So reflex is voluntary or involuntary?
Involuntary.
Involuntary. Autonomic, right? Autonomic. And is it fast or slow?
Fast.
Very fast, right? It moves, leg moves fast, like this. So reflex